You need to listen to me very closely. Do not ever trust a stranger when you're all alone in the wilderness. If you do, your story might end up like hers. On May 8th, 2006, Japanese tourist Tomomi Hanamir was solo hiking deep inside of a remote canyon. And as she was walking down the trail, something shifted. She heard a rustle in a nearby bush. And as she paused to kind of look around, she saw a mysterious figure emerge right in front of her. Someone who hadn't been there just a second earlier. She might have been thousands of miles away from home, but one thing now was for sure. She was not alone. When she realized she was no longer alone, Tomomi had two choices. She could either trust this mysterious stranger or she could keep her distance. She had no idea at the time, but this decision would be the most important and the most consequential decision of her entire life. Tomomi Hanamir was on a trip to the village of Supai, which is an isolated indigenous community at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. The main goal of this trip was to reach a place called Havasu Falls, which is a set of waterfalls and swimming pools known for their shiny, bright blue, crystal clear waters. It's a truly gorgeous place, and it's one of the most photographed waterfalls in the entire world. It honestly sounds incredible. And it would also sound incredible if I could officially claim that I am the very first person to graduate from Rice Memorial High School in Burlington, Vermont to ever reach 1 million subscribers on YouTube. I'm getting so close, but we're not quite there, and so please help me reach this ridiculous goal by hitting the subscribe button right now, especially if you're a repeat viewer. Tomomi lived with her father in Yokohama, Japan. From a young age, she was fascinated by the American West. After graduating from college in 1990, she decided to follow that passion and enrolled in an immersive English language program in the state of Mississippi. By 2006, she had already visited the United States 14 times and was deeply captivated by American history. She especially loved taking ambitious solo road trips through national parks, and her next stop was the Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon National Park is nothing short of magical. If you've ever been there, then you know that it pretty much looks more like a painting than an actual real thing. Or at least it does to me, but I spend way more time out on the trails than I do looking at art, and so you're just gonna have to trust me that the Grand Canyon gives off big painting vibes, okay? Tomomi had been to the Grand Canyon before, but this time she wanted to visit the historic village of Supai and the turquoise blue waterfalls of Havasu Canyon. In order to get there, you have to take a steep hike deep into the canyon, but it certainly looks worth it. It's breathtaking. And for Tomomi, the idea of a solo adventure like this was irresistible. She was ready for anything. At least that's what she thought. Days before her planned descent into the canyon, she boarded a flight from Japan to Los Angeles. She rented a car from the airport in LA and started the 7-hour drive across the desert to Flagstaff, Arizona. Once she got to Flagstaff, she checked into a simple motel, unpacked her belongings, and laid out all of her gear for her hike down to Supai the next morning. I couldn't find an exact gear list in my research, but I did find out that she brought her cell phone, her camera, her wallet, and some cash. She traveled light and practical, with sturdy boots and just the supplies required for a day in the canyon. It's clear that she had all the essentials for this dream journey, but the real question is, was she ready to face her worst nightmare? On May 8th, she woke up around 4 in the morning. Anyone who has ever hiked in the desert knows that you want to start any adventure as early as possible to avoid getting caught out in the peak heat. And of course, in the Grand Canyon, the midday heat can be deadly. Tomomi obviously knew this, and that's why she was driving her rental car through the quiet streets of Flagstaff at the literal butt crack of dawn. She stopped at a store on the edge of town, picking up bottled water, snacks, and a few last-minute items for her 8-mile hike. But before she left Flagstaff, she made a very important phone call. She pulled out her phone, and knowing that there would be zero cell reception on her trip down to Supai, she called her father, who was still in Japan, obviously. It was her birthday after all, and she wanted to talk to her dad. He wished her a happy birthday, and she filled him in on all of her plans. You know, that she would soon begin her descent into the canyon, that she was safe, that the weather was set up to be extremely beautiful. Her dad could hear the happiness and energy in her voice. It made him so proud to know that his daughter was out there chasing her dreams on the other side of the world. They both said that they loved each other, and Tomomi promised to call again whenever she next got cell reception. Her dad wouldn't realize it at the moment, but this would be the last time that he would ever hear his daughter's voice. When Tomomi arrived at the Supai trailhead, the sun had peaked out, but the morning air was still cool and crisp. She locked her rental car, she tightened the straps on her backpack, and she took one last look at the open sky above the canyon rim before she started her descent down the trail. Switchback by switchback, she passed through layers of ancient rock. With every step, she got farther and farther away from the modern world, and one step closer to the mysterious, isolated village that at this point she had only ever read about. And speaking of that, let's take a moment to talk about the village of Supai. It's only accessible by foot, mule, or helicopter, and it has a population of roughly 500 people. The Havasupai people once occupied a much larger territory before federal policies reduced their land. Today, tourism is a huge part of their income, but visitors have to remember that they're entering an indigenous community, not just chasing an Instagram-worthy waterfall, right? Tomomi knew all of that, of course. She respected the deep history of this place, and this journey was her way of showing that. It honestly reminds me of the way that I like to travel too. If I'm somewhere and there's like a historical marker or a plaque, then you better believe that I'm gonna sit there and read that whole damn thing to know the full history of this place that I'm in. But, you know, I swear, despite what my girlfriend would tell you, I'm really, really fun to travel with, trust me. However, if my girlfriend does get sick of me while we're traveling, she can easily just pull out her cell phone and chat with a friend or family member and ignore me for a little while, even if we're in a super remote place. And that's because we use Mint Mobile, who happens to be the sponsor of this video. Coverage-wise, Mint Mobile has 5G access for 98% of Americans and 4G LTE coverage for 99% of Americans. So whether you're at home or out in the sticks on a road trip, like my girlfriend and I often are, you're gonna be covered. Their plans also come in 3, 6, and 12-month chunks, and so the more months that you buy at once, the more you're gonna save. They also don't lock you into some one-size-fits-all mystery plan. You can choose the data amount that fits your life between 5 gigabytes, 15, 20 gigabytes, or unlimited every single month. And if you're on the unlimited plan, by the way, you get hotspot included as well. And if you're nervous about switching, you really shouldn't be. You can sign up and activate in minutes with eSIM. 96% of users rate themselves as highly satisfied with Mint's customer care, and every plan comes with a 7-day unconditional money-back guarantee. For a limited time this holiday season, you can get 50% off an unlimited premium wireless plan from Mint when you click my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. Lock in Mint's lowest price of the year and pay just $15 a month for a 3, 6, or 12-month plan. You got to do it. So one more time, click that link or scan the QR code. And now let's get back into this crazy story. Tomomi left the trailhead, and after hiking for a few hours, she found herself all alone and just about as like off the grid as it possibly gets. The silence of the canyon surrounded her, but she did still occasionally cross paths with other hikers, mule trains, and of course, dusty footprints left behind by earlier travelers. Every time that she crossed paths with someone, she would greet them with her trademark smile. For her, each stranger was an opportunity for connection. But of course, in reality, we know that each stranger is also a complete wild card, and unfortunately, she had no idea what any of them were capable of. After 8 tough miles of switchbacks and rocky trails, the canyon finally opened up and Tomomi arrived at Supai village. She was clearly tired from the long hike, but she was only done with the first part of her birthday trip. She was determined to keep going, but her first stop was the small cafe in town to sit for a few minutes with an ice cold drink. She kind of looked around and she saw a handful of other people. There were a few other friendly travelers, but that didn't stop her from suddenly getting this like eerie feeling. And she couldn't quite put her finger on it either. If you've ever had that strange feeling, almost like you're being watched, then you might get a sense for how Tomomi was feeling in this moment. It had been a great birthday so far, but suddenly her joy shifted to this weird, unsettled pit in her stomach. And she wasn't a paranoid person at all, but of course, as a solo woman far from home, Tomomi would have been very aware of the possible dangers. Every glance from a stranger hits a little harder when you know that you're 8 miles from your car and hours away from cell service. She knew that if something went wrong, well, she would be in big trouble. But she pushed that feeling away, and she focused on enjoying the moment. And so after her short rest, Tomomi made her way to the town's lodge to check into her room. But she didn't wait around for very long. She kind of just checked into her room real quick, and then she kept going because she had another 2-mile hike ahead of her to finally go see those majestic waterfalls. She strapped her backpack on, she adjusted her boots, and she set out on the trail once again. The next morning, Tuesday, May 9th, the lodge staff began their usual cleaning routine. But on this particular morning, something felt wrong. When they walked into Tomomi's room, it looked completely untouched. The bed was neatly made and all of her belongings were undisturbed. To them, it looked as if no one had slept in there the previous night. The staff talked amongst themselves about how weird this was, but they decided not to sound the alarm bells just yet. After all, maybe Tomomi decided to go out and hike under the stars. Maybe she did something like that. But after a few more hours, the worry among the staff had grown tremendously. Tomomi still hadn't returned, and at this point, time was essential. Every passing minute could mean life or death if Tomomi was in some kind of trouble out there in the canyon. And so that afternoon, the staff called the Coconino County Sheriff's Office to report Tomomi Hanamir missing. And so just like that, Supai Village had suddenly transformed from a peaceful oasis to the center of a shocking mystery. Night would soon fall over the canyon, and Tomomi still hadn't returned to the village. And by the next morning, May 10th, authorities launched a full-blown search operation to try and find her. Over 40 law enforcement officers and search and rescue volunteers combed the trails surrounding the village, calling out her name. Hikers were interviewed. Campgrounds were checked. She was last seen beginning her hike to Havasu Falls, which was just about a 2-mile trail, and so the search crews really tried to narrow their focus on that area. The smaller area gave them some hope that they could actually find her, and find her fast. Back in Japan, Tomomi's father never got that follow-up phone call that she'd promised him after her hike. Instead, he was the one who picked up the phone to call, only to get sent a voicemail over and over again. Eventually, he called the lodge, and they told him the horrifying truth that his daughter was missing in the vast Grand Canyon. The theories started immediately. At first, search crews wondered if Tomomi had gotten injured or gotten lost on her way down to the falls. It was only early May at this point, but on the day that she disappeared, the temperatures in the Grand Canyon had reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and when it gets that hot, the heat radiating off of the rocks can take even the most experienced hikers by surprise. And though they were searching a small 2-mile trail, you have to remember that she was already tired from her 8-mile descent into the canyon earlier that day. If Tomomi had taken even one wrong turn, it could have been disastrous. Dehydration, heat stroke, or some other kind of exposure are all possible when you're caught out in a canyon like that, especially when the environment turns harsh without warning. But the search wasn't going as quickly as they had initially hoped, and they started to wonder if the climate should still be their biggest fear. The search crews began talking to other tourists staying in Supai, gathering any information about where Tomomi could possibly be. We know that she was a super social and friendly person, and authorities started to think that she might have made friends with someone out on the trail, and maybe she was hiking with them or ended up staying the night at their campsite. Maybe, just maybe, Tomomi was actually safe and sound with some new random acquaintances. I mean, that was the kind of person she was, after all. Soon enough, the Japanese media started reporting on the disappearance as well. Many outlets showed images of Grand Canyon National Park without explaining that the disappearance had actually happened on the Havasupai Reservation, which is technically separate from the national park itself, though they're all kind of right there. It was clear that this was becoming an international incident, and everyone was desperate to solve the case. Meanwhile, law enforcement urged the tribal council to close the trail into Supai until Tomomi was found, but the tribe responded instead by banning all media from the reservation. And you have to remember, the tribe is fiercely independent, and they were trying to block out all of the chaos that this case had brought to their tight-knit community. Some even wilder rumors started to spread among the tribal members as well. Some locals said that a dark spirit was haunting the village. Others insisted that the disappearance was part of a bigger conspiracy by the National Park Service to publicly hurt the tribe's image. The Havasupai people had a long, violent history with the US government, and so it was very easy for some of them to see this as an attack rather than an isolated mystery. But even with some of the more far-fetched theories, most of them believed that foul play had been involved and that an outsider must have been responsible. One particular outsider drew a lot of attention, a man named Neil, an Irish traveler who had been living in Supai for about a month. He slept in bushes near the creek or stayed with different tribal members and often talked about goddesses, spirituality, and the need for the native people to, quote, reclaim their land. Witnesses said that they even saw Neil in the cafe on May 8th talking to Tomomi, and witnesses also said that he was acting extremely strange right after Tomomi disappeared. Neil apparently showed up uninvited to a tribal sweat lodge ceremony on May 9th, and he allegedly made inappropriate advances towards a Havasupai woman. He was removed from the ceremony, and several tribal men roughed him up afterwards, giving Neil some pretty serious head injuries. Neil was so hurt, in fact, that he was actually airlifted out of the canyon on May 10th. And so because of this crazy timing, his unusual behavior, and the fact that people said they saw him talking to Tomomi on the day she vanished, Neil became an early person of interest. However, in all of my research, I couldn't actually find out Neil's last name, and while his behavior was certainly unsettling, investigators ultimately found no evidence connecting him to Tomomi's disappearance. But I still wish I knew more about the reasons they ended up disregarding this mysterious Neil character. It feels like a really unique and strange twist in the events of the day, and there's just something about his behavior and the tribe's suspicion of him that makes me want to know a little bit more about him, but I'll leave it there. But beyond just Neil, there was apparently a widespread issue of women feeling unsafe around the village. FBI Special Agent Doug Lintner interviewed several local women who had experienced assaults or threats but had never reported them. Many incidents involved young men in the village making sexually aggressive comments to women on the trail or in the campground. And in 2 cases, women hiking alone said they were grabbed from behind by an unknown man who tried to pull them off the trail, but thankfully both managed to fight their attackers off and escape. These accounts didn't help them find Tomomi directly, but they did reveal a horrifying pattern of behavior that investigators felt they needed to understand as they worked to crack this case. And so now you can see all of the things that authorities were dealing with here. They had this complicated web of deep tribal politics, an international media blitz, and a clear issue of violence against women that were all colliding in this desperate, resource-straining, multi-day investigation to find Tomomi and hopefully save her life before time ran out. High above Supai, Tomomi's rental car was still parked at the trailhead, exactly where she had left it. When authorities first went to investigate it, nothing really looked unusual, but as another day passed with no sign of her, investigators knew they needed to take a closer look. And so deputies and rangers returned to the trailhead and they walked around the vehicle, and what they found only made them more unsettled than they already were. They didn't see any footprints, any damage, or anything at all that suggested she had come back to the vehicle. The doors were still locked, and the desert dust on the car showed no sign of being disturbed. And when they opened up the car, the inside told an even stranger story. Her luggage was still there. A guidebook was in the glove box, and a receipt from her pit stop in Flagstaff was lying on the passenger seat. Everything was neat and untouched, just like the eerie, chilling state of her hotel room down at the lodge. It was yet another dead end in their search that just kept dragging on and dragging on. Well, actually, that is until May 13th, when a shocking discovery changed everything. 5 days into the search for Tomomi, a local Havasupai tribe member went for a swim at the peaceful, beautiful waterfalls. And I've said it a few times already, but these pools are stunning and they're bright blue. It's a place that means a lot to both the tribe and any tourist who visits there. I couldn't find the name of the tribe member that was swimming around that day, But as they paddled around, enjoying the natural wonder, they realized that they had bumped into something weird. Maybe it was a rock or a log. But as the swimmer came up for air and wiped the water away from their face, they were shocked to realize that they definitely had not bumped into a rock or a log, but rather they had discovered their worst nightmare. Because right there, floating in the water, caught in a circular current, was the body of a young woman. Authorities rushed to the scene, but the mystery woman was pronounced dead basically immediately. The FBI dispatched a dive team to search the pools that she had been found in for any additional clues, and then they airlifted the body using a helicopter and sent it to the medical examiner for an autopsy. The autopsy would reveal some extremely brutal details, and I'm not gonna say everything here because it's really bad, but just a quick warning, this is a little bit graphic. There were 29 stab wounds on the body. 22 of those wounds were concentrated on her head and her neck, while the rest were located on her arms and hands. And the medical examiner stated that the wounds, on her arms were likely due to her trying to fight back against her attacker. She had also suffered a punctured lung and a chipped skull. But after evaluating these brutal wounds, they had another important question to answer, which of course is, who was this mystery victim? When examining the body, they looked a little bit closer at the victim's left foot. That's where they found a small tattoo that they hoped would help them get closer to the identity and ultimately getting closer to the bottom of this entire case. When they studied the tattoo, investigators realized something shocking. It was a small Japanese symbol. It was the symbol known as hana, which means flower. And you also might recognize that word as part of the last name of none other than Tomomi Hanamura. After decoding her tattoo, everyone involved finally had the heartbreaking final confirmation they needed to connect these brutal injuries to the friendly young woman they had been desperately searching for. But of course, the question still remained, what kind of monster could have done such unspeakable things to her? Gossip, rumors, and theories swirled around the village. The U.S. Attorney's Office at the time stated that it had been 5 years since the last murder had been committed in Supai, but in 2006, there had actually been a bit of a spike in crime on the reservation. Officers have been tracking a group of local teenagers that had been regularly stealing tourists' belongings so they could go buy drugs and alcohol, stuff like that. And perhaps this group of teenagers had run into Tomomi and tried to rob her, but then things went wrong and they got violent. That was certainly a possibility. Or maybe authorities should have taken a closer look into Neil, that sketchy Irish traveler that we talked about earlier. As the search for Tomomi transformed into a homicide investigation, Agent Doug Lintner kept interviewing residents, and one person kept rising to the surface. A man named Randy Redtail Westcogame. Randy was an 18-year-old tribal member with a long history of trouble. Just weeks before Tomomi disappeared, he had been arrested for assaulting another resident on the reservation. Officers familiar with him described a pattern of violence, heavy substance abuse, and just impulsive behavior. He was on their radar. But, of course, the investigation was so difficult that they couldn't just focus on any one subject yet. As Doug and the other agents looked deeper, some even more concerning details began to surface. They realized that Tomomi's camera, cell phone, cash, and credit cards had all been taken during the attack. They couldn't find them. It was looking more and more like a crime that pointed towards someone that might have been desperate enough to rob an innocent soul like Tomomi. After months of investigation, with countless dead ends and unanswered questions, Doug finally sat down for an interview with the person who could give him more information about what happened on that fateful hike back on May 8th, 2006. And that story goes a little bit like this. Tomomi left the Supai Lodge in the late afternoon heat, the kind that makes the air feel heavy, right? She'd barely been on the trail for a mile, kind of taking her time and soaking in all the nature. It had been a pretty good birthday so far, she thought. and she hoped that it would last forever. She observed the sunlight on the canyon walls, the quiet rush of the creek beside her, the promise of the beautiful waterfalls ahead. But then, she got that uneasy feeling all over again. The same one that she'd had back in the village at the picnic table. She got goosebumps at the base of her neck. She slowed down and just began listening to the trail around her. And just then, she heard rustling in the brush nearby. For a second, she wondered if it was just an animal or if it was something much, much worse. She turned in circles, looking all around her. And at first she saw nothing, just the canyon walls and empty trails. But when she faced forward again, that's when she saw him. A young man had stepped out of the brush ahead of her, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. He was dripping wet from the creek, with a Looney Tunes t-shirt plastered to his chest and basketball shorts clinging to his legs. He gave her a soft smile and struck up a conversation. In fact, he actually said the words that every solo hiker loves to hear. He said something along the lines of, "I can show you a better way to the falls if you want to take the locals route." Tomomi hesitated for half a second. She remembered how far from home she was and how badly she wanted her birthday to be perfect. But the man already started walking, almost as if her decision had been made for her. And so Tomomi took a deep breath, and against any of her doubts, she decided that she would follow him after all. And so the two moved deeper and deeper into the canyon. The trail started to narrow, the brush got thicker, the sounds of any other hikers faded way off behind them, and she kept trying to shake off the dread that was building up in her chest. I mean, the man had been friendly after all. But at some point on this locals shortcut, something shifted. Maybe it was when the main trail faded into loose rock. Maybe it was when she realized she couldn't see or hear any other hikers. Or maybe it was the way the man's voice started to feel less friendly and a lot more strange. It didn't register right away, but eventually she understood that she wasn't just hiking with the local, she was trapped with him. The young man suddenly stopped walking and he turned around. His soft smile was gone, and he told her to give him her money, her camera, her phone. He wanted everything. Tomomi froze, and when she didn't immediately hand over her things, the man pulled out a knife. She threw her arms up to try and protect herself, but this man was relentless. She tried to twist away, she tried to run or call out for help. She tried everything, but they were too far off the trail now, too isolated, too alone. And by the time it was over, this man had taken much more than just her belongings. He had taken her life. When the man finally stood up, he realized that this simple robbery had gone terribly wrong. But he decided to keep the story a secret for months. He'd bury it deep down inside, just like Supai Village was buried deep down in the canyon. But one day, the guilt and the pressure from law enforcement would grow too strong, and so that's why he would eventually tell this story to Doug and to other authorities. And of course, this man's name was Randy Westcogame. Even after Randy confessed, there were still pieces of the story that didn't make sense. I mean, yes, he admitted to gaining Tomomi's trust, leading her off the trail, pulling the knife, ending her life, and then hiding her body near the river. And he ultimately pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in federal prison on December 5th, 2006. But even with a full confession and conviction, the details didn't fully add up. For one, his statements never explained exactly why he had to stab her like so many times. I mean, Randy was a bigger guy, and it really wouldn't have taken that many blows to the head and neck to take Tomomi's life. And so why did he go so overboard? And although some of her belongings were reportedly found with her body when divers searched the pool, the LA Times never clarified which items were recovered and which were still missing. And so we still don't know exactly what Randy stole. Did he drop some of it? Did someone else come across her belongings before authorities arrived? And it's also possible that in the chaos of the investigation, some of the details were simply lost. And so I don't want to imply anything nefarious here. It just makes me wonder. And speaking of that, I'm also left wondering, Was Randy the only man in the canyon who had ever tried something like this? Or was he just the first one to finally get caught? Investigators never charged the strange Irish traveler known as Neil with anything related to Tomomi's murder, but his behavior, combined with the other random stories from women about being followed, grabbed, or threatened, all of that is just so unsettling. The canyon, for all its beauty and postcard perfection, was not nearly as safe as it looked. The case devastated the small community of Supai, and it sent shockwaves through Japan. It obviously broke the heart of Tomomi's father, who described his daughter as a young woman with a deep love for indigenous cultures and the American West, someone who should have experienced the wonder of that place, not its dark side. And even though Randy's guilty plea officially closed the case, the lingering mysteries surrounding the missing details and the unsettling side characters still leave room for questions that probably won't ever be answered. Looking back, I'm still haunted by the fact that her father, back in Japan, never got that follow-up birthday call that he wished for. My heart, sincerely hurts for him and for all the future phone calls that they never had a chance to share together. So please show some love for him and, of course, for Tomomi in the comments. I always appreciate it when you guys are honoring the victims in the stories that I talk about. And so please do that. And for anyone that ever hikes alone, especially in extremely isolated places like this, Tomomi's story is a brutal reminder that you should constantly be aware that you might not actually be alone after all. I hope that all of you can stay safe out there. And if you're still watching, then you clearly like deep dives into outdoor mysteries like this. And YouTube thinks that you'll want to watch this one next. And so give it a click. And thank you all so much for watching.